The notification lit up the dark granite countertop of the kitchen island, a harmless glow that shattered the illusion of a perfect Tuesday evening in Seattle. It was a standard text. "Don't wait up for me, huge crisis at the firm." But the GPS dot on Ethan's laptop screen blinked rhythmically, placing his wife not at her office, but at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. There is a specific kind of silence that fills a luxury apartment when a lie is confirmed. A heavy, suffocating quiet that demands a response. If you are drawn to stories where the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun, but a room service tray delivered at the wrong moment, stay with me as we unravel this. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made everything glisten with a deceptive sheen, masking the grime under layers of gray reflection. From the 42nd floor of the Rainier Tower, Ethan Vance watched the droplets streak against the floor-to-ceiling glass, distorting the lights of the ferry crossing Elliott Bay. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the Sub-Zero wine fridge and the soft, rhythmic patter against the window. It was a silence Ethan usually prized. Ordered, expensive, controlled. Just like the blueprints he drafted for his architectural firm. His phone buzzed on the kitchen island, the vibration harsh against the cold marble. Ethan didn't reach for it immediately. He took a sip of his scotch, the amber liquid burning pleasantly down his throat, before turning the screen over. Elena. "Don't wait up for me, babe. Huge crisis with the Nordstrom account. Going to be pulling an all-nighter with the team. Love you." Ethan stared at the text. The grammar was perfect. The excuse was plausible. Elena was a PR executive. Crises were her currency. But there was a tell. There was always a tell. Elena never used the word babe when she was actually working. She reverted to a clipped, professional tone even with him. Babe was a softener, a distraction. He set the glass down, the coaster absorbing the condensation, and opened his laptop. He didn't want to do this. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to go to bed, wake up, make espresso, and pretend that the distance growing between them was just the natural erosion of a 10-year marriage, not a tectonic split. But the architect in him needed to know the structural integrity of his life. He clicked on the Find My app. The map of Seattle loaded, a grid of gray and green. Elena's icon, a smiling photo from their trip to Napa 3 years ago, was nowhere near her office in Pioneer Square. It was pulsating softly at 411 University Street, the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. Ethan felt a cold sensation spread from his chest to his fingertips, numbing them. It wasn't rage. Rage was hot, chaotic. This was something else. A hollow, heavy dread, like watching a load-bearing wall give way in slow motion. He knew who she was with. Julian, his friend, his client, the man who had laughed at Ethan's dinner table last Saturday, complimenting the risotto while his foot brushed Elena's calf under the table. Ethan had caught the glance then, a microsecond of panic in Elena's eyes, but he had dismissed it. He had chosen blindness. Now the blindness was gone. He zoomed in on the map. The Fairmont, a classic choice. Expensive, discreet, historic. They were probably in one of the renovated suites, maybe ordering oysters, laughing about the crisis she had fabricated. Ethan picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over her name. He could call her. He could scream. He could demand she come home. But that would be messy. That would be desperate. And Ethan Vance did not do desperate. Instead, he Googled the number for the Fairmont Olympic front desk. "Guest services, how may I help you?" A polished, cheerful voice answered. "Yes, good evening," Ethan said, his voice steady, devoid of the tremor wrecking his insides. "I'd like to order room service for a guest. It's a surprise." "Certainly, sir. May I have the guest's name and room number?" "The room is under Julian Thorne," Ethan said, betting on Julian's ego. He wouldn't use a fake name. He was too arrogant for that. "One moment. Yes, Mr. Thorne in Suite 402? "Perfect," Ethan said, looking at his reflection in the dark window. He looked tired. "I'd like to send up a bottle of your finest champagne. Dom Perignon, if you have the 2012 vintage." "Excellent choice. Anything else?" "2 glasses," Ethan added, "and a note." "Of course. What would you like the card to say?" Ethan took a breath. He swirled the remaining scotch in his glass, watching the vortex. "Write this exactly. Don't wait up for me. Enjoy the night, Elena." "Ethan." "I have that down, sir. Should I have them deliver it immediately?" "Immediately," Ethan whispered. "And please tell the server not to knock. Just leave it right outside the door and ring the bell." He hung up. The silence returned to the apartment, but now it felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the heavy, charged silence of a fuse burning down. Ethan walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass, looking down at the city streets below, imagining the room service cart rolling down the plush hallway of the Fairmont, carrying a silver bucket that would shatter his world forever. The air in Suite 402 was heavy with the scent of sandalwood and expensive musk, a sharp contrast to the sterile, rain-washed scent of the city outside. Inside this golden bubble, the world felt suspended. The heavy velvet drapes were drawn tight against the Seattle night, shutting out the moral compass of the real world. Elena lay back against the mound of plush pillows, watching Julian pour 2 glasses of water from the bedside carafe. He was naked from the waist up, his movements loose and unhurried. This was what she craved. Not just the sex, but the carelessness. With Ethan, everything was measured. Ethan folded his socks. Ethan planned vacations 6 months in advance. Julian was chaos, a jagged edge that made her feel alive. "You're tense," Julian said, handing her a glass. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hand resting casually on her ankle. "Relax. The crisis at Nordstrom is very demanding, remember?" Elena forced a laugh, but it sounded brittle in the quiet room. She took a sip of water, her eyes darting to her phone on the nightstand. It remained silent, face down. "I hate lying to him," she whispered, a ritualistic confession she made every time, just to assuage a fraction of the guilt. "You're not lying to hurt him," Julian rationalized smoothly, leaning in to kiss her shoulder. "You're protecting him. Besides, Ethan lives in his blueprints. He probably hasn't even looked up from his desk since you texted." She wanted to believe that. She needed to believe that Ethan was the oblivious, emotionally distant husband she had painted him to be in her mind to justify this. The doorbell chime cut through the room like a physical blow. Elena jolted, spilling water onto the sheets. She pulled the duvet up to her chin, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Did you order something?" Julian frowned, glancing at his watch. It was past 10. "No, maybe it's turn-down service, bit late for that." "Don't open it," Elena hissed, panic tightening her throat. "Elena, relax. It's a hotel. It's probably just extra towels." Julian stood up, wrapping a towel around his waist with infuriating calmness. He walked through the short hallway to the door. Elena listened, holding her breath. She heard the click of the lock, the creak of the hinge. "Hello?" Julian's voice drifted back. Silence. "That's weird," Julian muttered. Curiosity warred with fear. Elena slipped on the silk robe Julian had bought for her, another secret kept in the trunk of her car, and crept toward the entryway. Julian was pulling a silver room service cart into the suite. There was no server in sight. "Ghost service," Julian joked, closing the door with his hip. "Look at this. Someone at the front desk must really like me. Or maybe they mixed up the rooms." On the cart sat a silver bucket sweating with condensation, cradling a bottle of Dom Perignon. Two crystal flutes stood beside it, catching the dim light of the entryway chandelier. "Dom 12, Julian whistled, impressed. "This is serious money. Maybe I should double-check the bill later, but for now..." He reached for the bottle. "Wait." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. She wasn't looking at the wine. She was looking at the thick, cream-colored envelope propped against the ice bucket. "What is it?" Julian asked, already twisting the wire cage off the cork. Elena reached out, her fingers trembling. The stationery was heavy, high quality, the kind Ethan used for his firm's invitations, but it was standard hotel stock. She opened the envelope. Inside was a single card. The handwriting was not the looping script of a concierge. It was architectural, block letters, all caps, precise, sharp strokes in black ink. "Don't wait up for me. Enjoy the night, Elena." "Ethan," the air left the room. The sound of the cork popping was as loud as a gunshot. Julian cheered softly, oblivious. "And we have liftoff. Come on, gorgeous, grab a glass." Elena couldn't move. The card slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the carpet. The words burned into her retinas. He knew. He didn't just suspect. He knew the hotel. He knew the room number. He knew Julian's name. "Elena?" Julian paused, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. He set the bottle down. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." She looked up at him, her face drained of color. The luxury suite suddenly felt like a cage. The warm lighting felt like an interrogation lamp. "He knows," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Who? Ethan?" Julian scoffed, stepping closer. "Don't be paranoid. He thinks you're at the office." "No," Elena said, stepping back from him, back from the cart, as if the champagne might explode. She pointed a shaking finger at the card on the floor. "He sent this." Julian looked down, his brow furrowing. He bent to pick up the card. As he read it, the arrogant smirk vanished from his face. The silence that followed was absolute, terrifying. It wasn't the anger of a confrontation she feared. It was the delivery. He hadn't come here to scream. He hadn't kicked down the door. He had sent a bottle of wine worth $300 with a note wishing her a good time. It was a power move. It was a message that said, "I see you. You are small, and I am in total control." "He knows we're here," Julian said, his voice losing its confident timbre. He looked at the door, suddenly realizing it was no barrier at all. "He's not waiting up," Elena repeated the words, feeling the nausea rise. "Julian, he's not coming." "So?" Julian tried to rally, but his eyes were darting around the room. "So he knows. Maybe it's better. Now we don't have to hide." "You don't understand," Elena said, wrapping her arms around herself, shivering despite the heat in the room. "Ethan doesn't do things impulsively. If he did this, he's already 10 steps ahead of us." She looked at the champagne, bubbles rising cheerfully in the neck of the bottle. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen. Elena didn't sleep. She couldn't stay in that hotel room, not with the unopened bottle of Dom Perignon standing on the cart like a tombstone. She had fled shortly after midnight, leaving Julian confused and sullen in the suite, and drove aimlessly through the rain-slicked streets of downtown Seattle for hours. By the time she parked her Audi in the garage of their building, it was 5:45 a.m. The sky was a bruised purple, transitioning into the relentless gray of another rainy day. The elevator ride up to the penthouse felt like an ascent to the gallows. Her hands shook as she pressed the button for the 42nd floor. She rehearsed her defenses. She would cry. She would beg. She would blame the stress, the wine, the loneliness. She prepared herself for the shouting, for the sight of smashed vases, for Ethan's cold fury. But when the elevator doors slid open directly into their foyer, the apartment was silent. Not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of routine. The smell of freshly ground coffee beans hung in the air, rich and earthy. The soft hiss of the espresso machine came from the kitchen. Elena stepped out of her heels, leaving them by the door. Her feet felt heavy as she walked down the hallway. She looked for suitcases. She looked for signs of destruction. There were none. The art on the walls was straight. The rug was vacuumed. She rounded the corner into the open-plan kitchen. Ethan was there. He was dressed in his charcoal gray suit, the one he wore for client meetings. His white shirt was crisp, the collar stiff. He was standing by the kitchen island, reading news on his tablet, a small cup of espresso next to his hand. He looked up as she entered. His face was a mask of polite disinterest. "Good morning," he said. His voice was steady, modulating perfectly. "You're back early." Elena froze, her hand gripping the edge of the granite counter for support. This was wrong. This was entirely wrong. "Ethan," she breathed out, her voice raspy from a night of unshed tears and panic. Coffee?" he interrupted, turning back to the machine. "I just made a fresh pot. I assumed you'd be exhausted after pulling an all-nighter." He emphasized the word all-nighter slightly, just a hair's breadth of inflection that could have been concern or could have been a knife. Elena stared at his back. He reached for a mug, her favorite ceramic one, and poured the coffee. He didn't slam it down. He set it gently on a coaster in front of her. I need to talk to you," Elena stammered. The script she had prepared was useless against this wall of domestic normalcy. "About the Nordstrom crisis?" Ethan asked, looking her directly in the eyes. His gaze was clear, unblinking. "Did you solve it?" Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The double meaning hung in the air between them, suffocating. "Did you solve the problem of your marriage? Did you finish your affair?" "Ethan, please," she whispered. "The hotel." "I have a site visit in Bellevue at 8. Ethan checked his watch, a dismissive gesture that cut her off more effectively than a slap. He picked up his tablet and slipped it into his leather briefcase. "I won't be home for dinner tonight. I have a late meeting." He walked around the island, moving into her personal space. Elena flinched, expecting him to grab her, to shake her, to demand answers. Instead, he stopped right beside her. He smelled of sandalwood soap and that expensive cold cologne he always wore. He leaned in, not to kiss her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Get some rest, Elena," he said softly, his voice devoid of warmth. "You look terrible." He didn't touch her. He walked past her, his dress shoes clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. The sound receded down the hall, followed by the heavy thud of the front door closing. The lock clicked into place. Elena stood alone in the immaculate kitchen. The steam from the coffee cup curled up into the air, twisting and dissolving like a ghost. He hadn't asked a single question. He hadn't demanded an explanation. He had simply refused to acknowledge her reality. She looked down at the coffee he had made her. Black, 2 sugars. Just the way she liked it. A sob finally broke loose from her chest. A ragged, ugly sound. She grabbed the mug and hurled it into the sink. The ceramic shattered, coffee splashing against the stainless steel in the window, staining the perfect view of the city. But the silence remained. It was louder now than before. He wasn't going to divorce her today. He wasn't going to kick her out. He was going to keep her here, trapped in this glass box, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The dinner party was held at the Prestons' estate in Medina, a sprawling glass and steel structure that hugged the shoreline of Lake Washington. Inside, the air was conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees, scented with lilies and roasting lamb. It was the kind of gathering where the wine cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and the laughter was carefully calibrated to never be too loud. Elena sat at the center of the long mahogany table, crumbling a piece of artisan bread into dust on her side plate. She wore a backless emerald dress that Ethan had picked out for her months ago. Tonight, the silk felt like plastic wrap against her skin, suffocating and cold. Across the table, Julian was charming the hostess, Sarah Preston. He looked relaxed, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, a glass of Cabernet in his hand. But Elena saw the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes darted nervously toward Ethan every time the conversation lulled. Ethan was seated at the head of the table, commanding the room with an ease that terrified her. For 7 days, he had been the perfect husband. He asked about her day. He poured her water. He touched the small of her back when they walked through doors. But he hadn't slept in their bed. He had moved to the guest room, citing insomnia, leaving Elena to stare at the ceiling in the master suite, waiting for an explosion that refused to come. "So, Ethan," Mark Preston boomed, slicing into his lamb, "I heard the firm is bidding on the new waterfront hotel project. Big stakes." Elena's fork clattered softly against her china. "We are," Ethan said smoothly, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. He didn't look at Elena. He looked straight at Julian. "It's a fascinating challenge. Hotels are tricky spaces. They're designed for privacy, for anonymity. People go there to be someone else." A ripple of polite agreement went around the table. Julian took a long sip of his wine, his knuckles white around the stem. "But the infrastructure," Ethan continued, his voice dropping an octave, drawing everyone in, "is all about visibility. Security cameras, keycard logs, Wi-Fi triangulation. We call it the silent observer in architecture. The building knows everything, even if the guests think they're invisible." Elena felt bile rise in her throat. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling so violently that water sloshed over the rim. "Is everything all right, Elena?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed in concern. "Fine," Elena choked out. "Just a little headache." "She's been working very hard," Ethan interjected, his smile tight and predatory. "Late nights, crisis management. Isn't that right, darling?" He turned to her then. The look in his eyes was devoid of humanity. It was the look of a scientist examining a specimen under a microscope. "Actually," Ethan pivoted back to the group, "speaking of hotels, Julian, you stayed at the Fairmont recently, didn't you? Or was it just a meeting?" The table went silent. Julian froze. He lowered his glass slowly, a drop of red wine staining the white tablecloth. I drop by occasionally for drinks," Julian stammered, his usual charisma evaporating under Ethan's direct gaze. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just curious," Ethan shrugged, swirling his wine. "I was thinking of taking Elena there for a weekend. But I heard the service can be a bit intrusive. Room service arriving when you didn't order it. That sort of thing. The air left the room for Elena. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. He was doing it. He was going to say it. He was going to peel back the skin of their life and show everyone the rot underneath right here, between the main course and dessert. I haven't had that experience, Julian said, his voice tight. Good to know, Ethan smiled, raising his glass. I suppose it depends on what you order. Some things come with a higher price tag than others. He held Julian's gaze for a second too long, an eternity of dominance, before turning back to Mark. But yes, the waterfront project. We're focusing on transparency. Glass walls. Nowhere to hide. I think that's what modern society craves, don't you? The end of secrets. The conversation moved on, drifting back to stocks and summer homes, but Elena couldn't hear it anymore. The noise of the dinner party faded into a dull roar. She looked across the table at Julian. He was pale, staring at his plate, refusing to meet her eyes. He was a coward. She realized it with a sudden, sickening clarity. He wasn't going to save her. And Ethan. Ethan was cutting his meat with surgical precision, chewing slowly, savoring every bite. He wasn't just angry. He was enjoying this. He was dismantling them piece by piece, course by course, and he hadn't even raised his voice. The mistake was small. It was a typo, in the subject line of a press release sent to 300 major media outlets, a missing L in publicity that turned the word into something obscene. In the past, Elena Vance would have caught it. She was known for her hawk-like attention to detail, the kind of executive who could spot a formatting error from across the room. But today, the letters on her MacBook screen were swimming. Elena? Her assistant, Sarah, stood in the doorway of her glass-walled office, holding a tablet like a shield. The VP of Marketing is on line 1. He's screaming. Elena pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to massage away the throbbing headache that had become her constant companion over the last fortnight. The bottle of aspirin in her desk drawer was empty. The flask of vodka she had started keeping in her gym bag, just for emergencies, just to sleep, was calling to her from under the desk. Tell him I'm in a meeting, Elena said, her voice raspy. He knows you're not, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. He can see you through the glass. Elena looked up. Across the open-plan office, the VP was staring at her, red-faced, phone pressed to his ear. She wasn't working. She was disintegrating. Every time her phone buzzed, she jumped, expecting a text from Ethan. Every time she went home, the silence in the penthouse was heavier, denser. Ethan was still there, eating dinner, watching the news, sleeping in the guest room. But he had ceased to be a husband. He was a roommate who knew her darkest secret and refused to speak its name. I'll handle it, Elena snapped, grabbing her phone and walking out. Not toward the VP, but toward the fire exit. She needed air. She needed to breathe. 5 miles away, in a quiet leather-paneled office in Belltown, the air was filtered and smelled of old paper and money. Ethan sat opposite distinctively uncomfortable high-backed chair. Across from him was Marcus Hale, Seattle's most ruthless divorce attorney. The desk between them was covered in glossy 8x10 photographs. They were high-resolution images. Elena and Julian entering the Fairmont. Elena and Julian kissing in a corner booth at a bistro in Capitol Hill. Julian's hand on her waist. Elena's head thrown back in laughter, a genuine, carefree laugh that Ethan realized he hadn't heard in years. The evidence is irrefutable, Hale said, his voice a low, soothing baritone. Washington is a no-fault state, generally speaking. But with the infidelity clause in your prenuptial agreement, combined with the financial entanglement of Mr. Thorne's business ventures with your firm, we have leverage. Significant leverage. Ethan looked at the photo of his wife, laughing. He traced the curve of her jaw with his thumb. He should have felt vindicated. This was the proof that he wasn't crazy, that his cruelty was justified. We can freeze the joint accounts by Friday, Hale continued, tapping a pen on a legal pad. We can file for immediate occupancy of the penthouse. She'll be out within 48 hours of being served. And regarding the firm's PR contract with her agency, we can terminate that for breach of moral conduct. It will destroy her professional standing, of course. Destroy her. Ethan repeated the words. They tasted like ash. It's a standard aggressive strategy, Ethan. You wanted the full option. Ethan looked up at the lawyer. I did. He looked back at the photos. He had spent 2 weeks meticulously constructing this trap, isolating Elena, letting her stew in her own guilt, waiting for her to crack. He had succeeded. She was a ghost of herself, and now he had the weapon to finish her off. But looking at the frozen image of her happiness with another man, the victory felt hollow. It didn't fix the hole in his chest. It didn't make the penthouse feel less empty. It was just paperwork, just the bureaucratic dismantling of a decade of life. Do it, Ethan said, pushing the photos away as if they were contaminated. Draft the papers, but don't file them yet. Hale raised an eyebrow. Why wait? The asset dissipation risk. I said wait. Ethan stood up, buttoning his jacket. The control was slipping, just a fraction. He needed to see her break one last time. He needed her to say it. He needed the confession more than he needed the assets. I'll tell you when to pull the trigger. He walked out of the office into the gray afternoon, leaving the evidence of his broken heart spread out on the mahogany desk. It was past 1 a.m. when Elena keyed into the penthouse. She had left her car at the office, taking an Uber home because her hands were shaking too badly to grip the steering wheel. The vodka she had consumed at a bar in Capitol Hill, a dive bar where no one knew her name, was buzzing in her veins, dulling the sharp edges of her fear, but amplifying her desperation. The apartment was dark. The floor-to-ceiling windows were sheets of black rain, reflecting the ghostly interior of the living room. Elena dropped her keys on the console table. The sound was too loud, a metallic crash in the stillness. She kicked off her heels and walked into the living room, expecting emptiness. But he was there. Ethan was sitting in the Eames chair facing the window, his silhouette cut out against the city lights. He wasn't reading. He wasn't drinking. He was just sitting, perfectly still, watching the storm. Stop it, Elena said. Her voice was slurred, thick with exhaustion and alcohol. Ethan didn't turn around. Stop what? Stop haunting me, she screamed. The sound tore through her throat, raw and ugly. Stop acting like nothing happened. Stop making coffee. Stop being so goddamn perfect. She walked toward him, swaying slightly. Why haven't you kicked me out? Why haven't you served me papers? I know you know. I know you sent the champagne. Why are you torturing me? Ethan slowly rotated the chair. In the half-light, his face was unreadable, a landscape of shadows. I'm not torturing you, Elena, he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. I'm waiting. For what? She demanded, tears finally spilling over, hot and stinging. For me to beg? Is that what you want? You want to see me on my knees? I'm waiting for you to tell me the truth, Ethan said. Not the lie about the Nordstrom account. Not the lie about the late meetings, the truth about why. Elena collapsed onto the sofa opposite him. The fight drained out of her legs. She looked at her husband, this man who built skyscrapers, who structured his life like a grid, who loved her with the intensity of a possessive collector. "I was suffocating," she whispered. Ethan didn't blink. "I gave you everything. This apartment, your career connections, a life most people only dream of." "That's the problem, Ethan," Elena cried out. "It's your life, it's your apartment, it's your design. Even I am your design. I have to dress a certain way, speak a certain way. With Julian—" She stopped, choking on the name. "Go on," Ethan said, cold as ice. "With Julian." "With him, I was messy," she confessed, the shame burning her cheeks. "I could be loud. I could be wrong. I didn't have to be the perfect wife of the perfect architect. I felt real." Ethan stood up then. He walked to the window, his back to her. "Real." He repeated the word, tasting its bitterness. "You think betraying 10 years of loyalty makes you real? You think lying to my face for 6 months makes you alive?" He turned back to her, and for the first time, Elena saw the crack in his armor. His eyes weren't angry. They were dead. "I knew about the lunch dates in February," Ethan said, listing the facts like items on a bill of quantities. "I knew about the burner phone you keep in your gym bag. I knew you weren't in San Francisco for that conference in March. I watched you erase yourself from our marriage piece by piece, Elena. And I stayed silent because I arrogantly thought that if I just made things better, if I just loved you harder, you would come back." Elena sobbed into her hands. "I'm sorry. Ethan, I am so sorry." "The room service," Ethan continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That wasn't revenge. That was a test. I wanted to see if you would come home, if you would run out of that hotel room and come back to me." "I did come home," she pleaded. "No." Ethan shook his head slowly. "You came back to the apartment, but you didn't come back to me. You came back to hide." He walked past her toward the hallway. He stopped briefly by the sofa where she sat crumpled, a mess of expensive silk and ruined mascara. "You wanted to be free of my control, Elena," he said, not looking down at her. "You're going to get your wish. But remember, you're the one who demolished the foundation. Don't blame gravity when the roof caves in." He walked away into the darkness of the bedroom, leaving her alone in the large, beautiful, silent room. The conversation was over. The marriage was over. Now, only the execution remained. The Grand Hyatt ballroom was a sea of black ties and sequins, glittering under the chandeliers like a diamond-crusted ocean. It was the Seattle Architectural Gala, the most important night of the year for Ethan's firm. For Elena, it felt like a funeral procession where she was both the mourner and the corpse. She stood beside Ethan near the ice sculpture, a frozen replica of the Space Needle melting imperceptibly in the heat of 500 bodies. Her smile was plastered on, a muscle memory from a decade of PR training, but her eyes were darting nervously. Ethan was in his element. He shook hands, accepted congratulations on the waterfront project, and introduced Elena as my wife, with a tone so neutral it made her skin crawl. He was the picture of success, stoic, handsome, untouchable. Then Julian arrived. He swept in with the arrogance that had once drawn Elena to him like a moth to a flame. He was laughing with a group of investors, holding a glass of scotch, looking every bit the master of his universe. He spotted them and began to make his way over, weaving through the crowd. Elena's breath hitched. "Ethan, please," she whispered, not looking at her husband. "Let's go to the other side of the room." "Stay," Ethan said. He didn't move. He took a sip of his sparkling water, his eyes fixed on Julian's approach. "The timing needs to be precise." "What timing?" Elena asked, a fresh wave of nausea rolling over her. Julian reached them. "Ethan, Elena," he nodded, his smile tight but practiced. "Quite the turnout. I heard the bid for the marina is looking strong." "Transparency pays off, Julian," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the string quartet. "As I told you at dinner, structures built on fraud always collapse." Julian's smile faltered. "I'm not sure I follow." "You will," Ethan said simply. He looked past Julian's shoulder toward the main entrance. The heavy double doors had opened, admitting not guests, but 3 men in dark, ill-fitting suits. They moved with a specific kind of purpose that cut through the social niceties of the gala. They weren't waiters. They weren't architects. Elena followed Ethan's gaze. She saw the earpieces. She saw the badges flashing discreetly on their belts. "Federal agents," Ethan observed, his tone conversational. "White-collar crime division." Julian turned around, paling instantly. "What is this?" "My private investigator is very thorough," Ethan murmured, leaning in slightly so only Elena and Julian could hear. When looking for receipts for hotel rooms, he found receipts for other things. Wire transfers, shell companies, embezzlement from our joint venture funds. You gave them the files?" Julian hissed, stepping back. "I have a fiduciary duty to report financial irregularities," Ethan said coldly. "And I believe they have a warrant." The room quieted as the agents approached. It wasn't a dramatic tackle. It was a quiet tap on the shoulder, a hushed exchange of words, and the flash of a federal warrant. But in the high society echo chamber of Seattle, it was louder than a bomb. Heads turned, whispers ignited like wildfire. Julian Thorne, fraud, FBI. As the agents flanked Julian, guiding him firmly toward the exit, the crowd parted. But the eyes didn't stop at Julian. They slid to Elena Vance, who handled Julian's PR. Elena Vance, who had been seen lunching with him for months. Elena Vance, who was currently standing frozen, looking not at her husband, but at the man being led away in handcuffs. The whisper network connected the dots instantly. The mistress, the accomplice. Elena felt the judgment physically, 1,000 needles piercing her skin. She turned to Ethan, panic clawing at her throat. "Ethan, everyone is looking. Help me. Take me out of here." Ethan looked at her. For a moment, she thought she saw pity in his eyes. But then he remembered the hotel room. He remembered the lies. He remembered the text message. He set his glass down on a passing tray. "No," Ethan said. "I think I'll stay. I have a speech to give." He adjusted his cufflinks, turned his back on her, and walked toward the stage. Elena was left standing alone in the center of the ballroom, isolated in a circle of empty space that no one dared to cross, exposed under the unforgiving glare of the crystal chandeliers. The movers came on a Tuesday, exactly 3 months after the notification had lit up Ethan's phone. There was a poetic symmetry to it that Ethan appreciated, though he found no joy in it. They were efficient, professional men who packed Elena's remaining belongings into cardboard boxes with practiced indifference. They took the clothes from the walk-in closet, leaving half the racks bare. They took the vanity mirror with the ornate gold frame. They took the collection of art books she had bought in Paris. By noon, the penthouse was silent again. Ethan stood in the center of the living room. The space felt larger now, vast and cavernous. The echo of his own footsteps on the hardwood floor was sharper, devoid of the softening influence of Elena's presence. He walked to the kitchen island. The divorce decree sat there, a thick stack of paper held together by a heavy binder clip. It was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering. Marcus Hale had delivered on every promise. The infidelity clause had been triggered. The prenuptial agreement had held firm like a seawall against a storm. Ethan retained the apartment, the investments, the cars, and his pension. Elena had walked away with a small settlement, enough to start over in a modest rental in Tacoma, perhaps, but not enough to maintain the life she had grown to despise. Her career was in tatters. The scandal with Julian had been merciless. While she wasn't criminally liable for his embezzlement, the court of public opinion had judged her guilty by association. In Seattle's tight-knit corporate circles, she was radioactive. And Julian? Julian was currently out on bail, wearing an ankle monitor, awaiting a trial that would likely end with a 3-year sentence in a federal facility. Ethan poured himself a glass of scotch. It wasn't the rare vintage he had opened that night. It was just standard drink, functional and numbing. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was unchanged. The Space Needle still pierced the gray sky. The ferries still cut white wakes across the dark waters of Elliott Bay. The rain still fell, washing the city in a perpetual, cleansing sorrow. He had won. In every measurable metric, Ethan Vance had won the war. He had protected his assets. He had exposed the fraud. He had excised the cancer of betrayal from his life with surgical precision. So why did the silence feel so heavy? He took a sip of the scotch, letting the burn settle in his chest. He looked at the reflection in the glass. He saw a man who was impeccably dressed, financially secure, and morally vindicated. He also saw a man who would eat dinner alone tonight, and tomorrow night, and the night after that. He thought about calling someone. A friend? But he had kept his circle small, and during the divorce he had isolated himself to control the narrative. A colleague? No, that was business. He realized then that his anger had been a companion. For 3 months, the rage, the planning, and the execution of his revenge had filled the void. It had given him a purpose. It had driven him out of bed in the morning. Now the anger was gone, burned up like fuel, leaving only ash. He remembered Elena's words from that night in the dark. I was suffocating. I wanted to feel real. He looked around the immaculate, silent apartment. It was a beautiful cage, a perfect architectural rendering of a life, devoid of the messy, chaotic warmth of living. Ethan pressed his hand against the cold glass. Below him, the city lights flickered on, millions of lives intersecting, colliding, breaking, and healing. He was above it all, safe in his tower, untouched and untouchable. He raised his glass to the empty room, to the ghost of the woman who used to laugh too loud, and to the silence that was now his only partner. Don't wait up, he whispered to the empty air. He drank the rest of the scotch in one swallow, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark, listening to the rain fall against the glass, waiting for a morning that would feel exactly the same as the night.